There is a man in Ohio who spent 3 years rebuilding a 1967 Chevrolet Impala that sat rotting in his grandfather's garage. He skipped vacations, he worked weekends, he spent money he probably should have saved. And when someone asked him why, he went completely silent for a moment, then said, "I don't know, I just had to." That answer is more psychologically loaded than it sounds. Because here's the thing. People who restore their grandfather's cars are not just fixing vehicles. Something else is happening underneath all that grease and rust. Something that has nothing to do with horsepower or chrome finish. And once you understand what is actually going on inside the minds of these people, you will never look at an old car the same way again. Let's start with the moment it usually begins. Someone loses their grandfather. The funeral happens, the family gathers, and eventually everyone goes back to their normal lives. But there is always that one person who cannot quite let go. Not in a broken way, not in an unhealthy way. Just in a quiet, persistent way that they cannot fully explain. And then they see the car, sitting in the garage, covered in dust, maybe with a flat tire and a cracked windshield. And something shifts inside them. Most people would call a junk dealer. This person calls no one. They just start. Psychologists have a name for what kicks in at this moment. It is called continuing bonds. For a long time, grief experts believed that the healthiest thing a person could do after losing someone was to detach, move on, and build a new life without that person at the center of it. But research over the last few decades completely overturned that idea. What they found is that many people heal better when they maintain a symbolic connection to the person they lost, not by being stuck in the past, but by finding living, breathing ways to keep that relationship alive. The car becomes that connection. Every bolt that gets tightened, every panel that gets sanded, every part that gets sourced from some obscure supplier 3 states away, each of those actions is a conversation. A one-sided conversation with someone who is no longer here. And that might sound sad on the surface, but it is actually one of the most emotionally intelligent things a grieving person can do. They are not pretending their grandfather is still alive. They are honoring the fact that he existed, that he mattered, that his life left a mark worth preserving. Now, here is where it gets personal for most of these people, even if they never admit it. Many of them grew up watching their grandfather work on that very car. Saturday mornings in the garage, the smell of oil and metal, the sound of a wrench hitting concrete. Maybe they handed tools over without really knowing what they were for. Maybe they sat on a workbench, just watching, absorbing, existing in that space. Those memories do not feel like memories. They feel like identity. And when the grandfather is gone, there is suddenly a hole where that identity used to live. Restoring the car is a way of climbing back into that feeling. The brain is fascinating in this regard. When you engage in a physical task that is tied to an emotional memory, your nervous system does not cleanly separate the two. The smell of engine grease can pull you back to age 9. The sound of a carburetor can make your chest tight in a way that has nothing to do with mechanics. These people are not just restoring a car. They are restoring a version of themselves that felt safe, loved, and connected to someone they deeply admired. And there is something else happening too. Something about identity and legacy that goes even deeper. There's a psychological concept around the idea that human beings have a fundamental need to feel like their life is part of a larger story. Not just their own story, but a story that started before them and will continue after them. When you are the person who rebuilds your grandfather's car, you become the keeper of something. You become the link in the chain. That car will outlive you too, eventually. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you know it might mean something to someone else down the line. That is an enormous feeling to carry around, and it is also deeply motivating. This is why these projects almost never die, even when they become impossibly difficult. The person hits a wall, a part that cannot be found, a repair that costs more than expected, a setback that would make any rational person quit. But they do not quit. And it is not stubbornness. It is that they cannot abandon the project without feeling like they are abandoning the person. The stakes are emotional, not mechanical. Now, Let's talk about something that almost nobody discusses when this topic comes up. A significant number of people who take on these restorations had complicated relationships with their grandfathers. Not abusive or traumatic necessarily, but complicated. Maybe there was emotional distance. Maybe there were things left unsaid. Maybe the grandfather was a man of few words and even fewer hugs, which was common for that generation. And the grandchild grew up loving him, but never quite feeling like they broke through that wall. The restoration project becomes unfinished emotional business, a chance to understand someone through their possessions, to spend time with them in the only way still possible, to sit inside something they built or owned or loved, and try to figure out who they really were. Some people report that halfway through a restoration, they start learning things about their grandfather they never knew. They find old receipts in the glove box, a handwritten note tucked under a seat, a list of radio stations scrawled on a piece of paper. Small details that suddenly make the person feel human and three-dimensional in a way they never did while they were alive. And that discovery can be more healing than years of just carrying grief quietly. The car tells the story the man never did. There is also something powerful about the physical nature of this kind of grieving. Most of grief happens inside your head. The replaying of memories, the imagining of conversations you wish you had, the absence that shows up in unexpected moments. It is invisible and sometimes paralyzing. But restoration is the opposite of that. It is loud, physical, demanding, and concrete. You cannot be lost in abstract grief when you are trying to figure out why a transmission is slipping. The work forces you into the present moment in a way that nothing else quite does. It is almost like the car is taking care of you while you take care of it. And when it is finally done, when that engine turns over for the first time after years of silence, something happens that is very hard to describe. People talk about crying. Not sad crying. Something more complicated than that. A release. A sense of completion. A feeling like a conversation that was interrupted years ago just found its ending. The car runs again, which means, in some deeply symbolic way, so do they. One man who finished restoring his grandfather's 1952 Ford truck said he sat in the driver's seat for almost an hour before driving it anywhere. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, not thinking about anything in particular. Just being inside something that his grandfather had also sat inside. Touching a steering wheel those same hands had touched. Existing, for a moment, in the same space across time. That is not a hobby. That is something ancient and deeply human. The need to stay connected. The need to honor where you came from. The need to do something with your hands when words are not enough and feelings are too big to contain. So the next time you see someone pouring everything they have into a rusted old car that most people would have scrapped, understand that what you are witnessing is not obsession. It is love. Expressed the only way still available, through oil and metal and time. And maybe that is the truest form of it.